Let's talk about pre-flop. Trying to achieve a top-tier win rate in poker before dialing in pre-flop is like trying to build a skyscraper with a foundation made of beams, because while beams are quite versatile, they don't necessarily make the best foundation for skyscrapers. So today, let's dial in our pre-flop game together. I'm going to be sharing a bunch of ranges today, and these aren't ranges that we pulled somewhere off the internet for 100 big blind, 6 max online poker. No, we custom built these specifically for live poker. It was grueling, it was arduous, but we did the work so you guys can reap the rewards and you don't fall face first on a pile full of beans. First, before we jump in, 5 big picture takeaways. Number 1, be the one making an aggressive action. In high rake live environments, we generally want to play tight, and when we do come into play a pot, we want to make that pot bigger to minimize the effect of rake. Be the one raising, be the one 3-betting, be the one taking the aggressive action, eliminate most limping and calling from your pre-flop game. Number 2, when fish or recreational player come in for a raise, we generally want to be playing 3-bet or fold. We're going to be able to realize our biggest edge by getting pots heads up in position. We don't want to play multi-way. We don't want to let a bunch of people in the pot. We just want to realize our edge heads up in position against weaker players. The 2 general exceptions to this is when we are on the button or when we are in the big blind. Number 3, and this is going to be the corollary to number 2, when a strong pro opens, this is when we want to be doing quite a lot more flatting. Why? In general, the players who are going to make the most mistakes post-flop are going to be the fish. So when a strong pro opens, say early position, and we're middle position, we want to be doing a lot of flatting to let the fish in the pot, because those are going to be the players who are going to make the most mistakes post-flop and where our win rate is going to come from. Number 4, throw positional configuration out the window. Most solved pre-flop ranges you see are based upon positional configuration. For example, when a player opens in the cutoff and we are on the button, here are the hands we 3-bet button versus cutoff. The problem with using these type of ranges live, most recreational players or fish are not taking positional configuration into account. They don't even know how to spell configuration. For example, if you're playing against a tight fish, that tight fish probably opens the same range under the gun as he does on the hijack or the cutoff or the button. Fish in general have the hands they open and the hands they 3-bet. So we want to play against the player type and the ranges they are playing rather than using positional configuration. Number 5, these ranges are for 200 big blind poker. For example, you're playing 2-5 at $1,000 effective, or you're playing 5-10 at 2,000 effective. How do you adjust these ranges if you are playing deeper or more shallow? If you are playing deeper, you generally want to favor hands that are suited and can make the nuts and cooler your opponents when deep. And if you are playing shallow, you generally favor hands that can just make very strong top pair hands, so more offsuit broadways come into effect. All right, I get it. I know what you're thinking. Show me the charts. Okay, cool. Let us jump in, and we are going to start off with our open range from early positions. This is assuming we are first to act here. As you notice, we are going to be very, very tight from early position, and these ranges again are for 200 big blind poker. Pretty tight here. You see it's going to be mostly suited cards. It's going to be our strongest aces, ace-9 suited plus, and then some of our wheel aces. Maybe wondering why like ace-deuce suited doesn't open here. Ace-deuce suited and ace-6 suited are our 2 worst suited aces. The problem with ace-deuce is when it does make a straight, it just always makes the butt end of a straight, and then ace-6 is the worst ace that cannot make a straight. So we want to open our strongest aces here, all of our suited broadways, and you'll notice here we're opening some suited connectors like 5-6 suited, 7-6 suited, 8-7 suited, but we are not opening these offsuit broadways like king-queen off or ace-jack off. Now the adjustment I would make if most of your game is more shallow, say you're playing 80 big blinds or 100 big blind poker, I would fold all of these suited connectors here, and I would start opening these offsuit broadways, ace-jack and king-queen. But 100 big blinds deep, oftentimes making just top pair a good kicker is a hand that's good enough to play for all the money. In summary, this is what a pretty solid range from EP would look like here. All right, let's move along the positional spectrum here, and we'll go to the hijack. And as you see from the hijack here, we're opening a little bit wider. We're not going to go through every position because I think you guys can kind of fill in the blanks in between EP and hijack. But as you see here, just to get the general pattern, we're opening about 20% here, where we were opening about 12% from EP. You see here, we're getting a little bit wider. We're opening down to pocket 4s. All of our ace-x is opening ace-x suited, king-x suited down to king-7, queen-x down to queen-8, and jack-8 suited, and 10-8 suited here. And then our offsuit broadways, we're opening a few more of those now. King-queen, ace-jack, king-jack, ace-10. This is what a nice open range from the hijack would look like at about 200 big blinds effective. All right, let's move to the button now. And as you can see, it starts to get pretty pretty wide. These ranges are taking into account that we are going to have some moderate post-flop edge. If you are a newer player or you are still kind of figuring out poker, tighter is probably better. We see here a 44% open range on the button going down to ace-4 off here, opening a lot of these double and triple gapper suited hands, all of our queen X suited, all of our king X suited, down to jack 5 suited. Now I want to show you what happens if we put two very, very passive fish in the blinds, right? We just don't have them 3-bet very much. We have them maybe call a little bit too much, and we just have them play like typical live fish post-flop where they're just going to be playing their draws too passively. This is now the range we can open on the button. As you can see, we're almost opening nearly 100%. If you do have more passive fish in the blinds, if you feel like you have an edge, you can start getting pretty out of line as far as the hands that you can open profitably on the button. All right, guys, real quick, if you're enjoying the video, please subscribe to the channel. If you show me you're subscribed to the channel, pull out your phone, show me in person you're subscribed to the channel, I will give you my permission to get my face tattooed on you. A lot of people have been asking, hey, Mark, can I have your permission to get your face tattooed on me? Anyway, just subscribe to the channel, and yes, you can. All right, let's talk about ISOing now. So let's say under the gun limps and we are next to act. This would be a range that I would consider ISOing the limper. So coming in for a raise over the limper. As you can see, this is pretty tight. It's going to look a lot like our EP open range, which makes a lot of sense here because generally we're just concerned about having 5, 6 players behind us who could wake up at any time with a premium hand. As you can see, these hands here that are half, these are partials. Now, I'm not sitting there in game randomizing. That is ridiculous. How I'm deciding whether to open these hands or not, the deeper I am, the more likely I am to ISO a hand like pocket 7s or 9-8 suited or ace-4 suited. How else am I thinking about it? The bigger the skill edge I have. Say this player is very, very weak who limps under the gun. I may be more likely to ISO one of these partial hands. And finally, are they likely to limp re-raise? If I know they're just opening all their good hands and they are limping all their mediocre medium hands, then I'm much more likely to ISO a hand like 6s or 5s or ace-8 suited here. So those would be the questions I would ask when I am thinking about ISOing some of these hands that are on the border. Do not randomize live. If you randomize live, you are a fish. Now let's look at our range when we are on the button and somebody limps. And as you can see, this is much wider here. Now it's not going to be as wide as our button open range because that open range was pretty ridiculous. And we have to take into account when people limp, they generally don't limp to limp fold. So we generally just want some pretty good hands here. Now, the reason we can go much wider than early position is because we don't have to worry about so many players behind us. And again, these partials I would determine by asking the questions, how big is our skill edge? How deep are we? Where did this player limp from? Did they limp from the cutoff or did they limp from EP? Are the blinds behind us aggressive? Are those players going to 3-bet aggressively? Those are the questions I would be asking to determine just how wide we can ISO when we are on the button. All right, let's talk about continuing versus opens now. So this would be what my hijack continue range would look like. As we talked about, generally want to play 3-bet or fold, especially when we are not on the button or not in the big blind when a fish or recreational player opens. As you can see, this one is pretty tight because in general, the average recreational player doesn't open that wide from up front. Now, if this is a more aggressive player, we can get a little bit wider here. And if this is a tighter player, we need to be a little bit tighter ourselves. But in general, we want to play pots heads up in position against weaker players when deep where we can realize our skill edge. Now I want to go ahead and look at 2 different scenarios from the button when a recreational player opens. First, I want to look at when a aggressive player opens. So say an aggressive recreational player opens from the hijack or cutoff. It doesn't really matter where they open from. As we talked about, positional configuration doesn't matter as much as how aggressive or how tight or how passive is this player. So let's say an aggressive player opens and we are on the button here. We can go pretty wide, right? We generally want to be playing more 3-bet or fold, but we can occasionally work in some flats when we are on the button because we are going to have absolute position post flop. You can see when an aggressive player opens, we just generally want to be ISOing quite a lot here. We're going all the way down to like king 6 suited, all of our suited connectors, all the way down to pocket deuces. If we do have like a super big whale who's very deep with us in the big blind or whatever, maybe we can start working in some flats. But in general, I still prefer to play 3-bet or fold versus recreational players opens even on the button. Now let's look at what happens when we are on the button and a very tight recreational player opens, right? So say this player is opening like 7.5%. You may be thinking 7.5%, that's tighter than our under the gun range. Right. tighter than our under the gun range. So say this player has like an open limping range. Say they're just limping with a lot of their pairs, a lot of their suited broadways, a lot of their suited ace-x. Well, in that case, they may only be opening their premiums, right? In that case, we want to be continuing pretty tight as a 3-bet here. And here's when we would work in more flats. We generally just don't want to 3-bet a super strong range. Now, say we are in the hijack or the cutoff, I would be much less likely to flat. In general, I don't want to be continuing as a call when a fish opens unless we are on the button or we are in the big blind. All right, let's talk about our big blind defense here. And this is going to be for when we're 200 big blinds again versus a 4x open. And this is against that player type we talked about before, the player type who's going to have some limps. And when they open, they're going to be very strong. So this would be against a player who's opening maybe 7.5% RFI. Say he opens hijack or cutoff, folds to us in the big blind. This would be our continue range. As you see here, we are going to be continuing as a call quite a lot. And we're just going to be 3-betting our very good hands here. How would I decide if I'm 3-betting a hand like ace queen suited or pocket jacks? Again, how tight is the player? If they're a super nit, those hands just get flatted. If maybe they're opening a little bit wider, those hands get 3-bet for value. And as you see here, generally against recreational players, we just want to be 3-betting our good, better, best hands. We don't really have a bunch of 3-bet bluffs because when they open, they generally just continue too much. So we just want to be able to out-hand them. So we're not going to be 3-betting hands like suited connectors here against a recreational player with a tight range. That would be ridiculous. We just want to be 3-betting our very strong hands when a passive recreational player opens and we're in the big blind. All right, now a little bit more wild. Let's say that aggressive recreational player opens and folds around to us in the big blind. And now you see here, we're getting a little bit more crazy. We're doing a ton of 3-betting versus say a 30% open range. But as you can see, again, this is going to be a very linear 3-bet range, which means we're going to be 3-betting our good hands, our better hands, and our best hands. You may be wondering, like, how does a hand like King 5 suited fall into that category? Well, pretty much against a 30% open range, all of these hands are performing pretty well. So we're just going to be 3-betting quite a lot. As you can see, this upper left-hand corner here,
the left-hand snippet of the hand balloon chart. The hand balloon chart
just gets 3-bet pure. So all of our suited broadways, all of our big pairs, as you can see, we're defending quite a lot wider here, but we're mostly defending as a 3-bet rather than as a call, which is probably a big departure from how a lot of people are playing. I know it's a big departure from how I'm playing a lot of the time, but remember, in high rake live environments, when someone opens for 4x, we want to play bigger pots against bad players to minimize the effect of rake. And again, this is when a loose aggressive player opens and it folds to us and we are in the big blind. All right, now let's talk about squeezing. And what is squeezing? Well, squeezing is when player A opens, player B cold calls in the field, and now it comes around to us. So in this example, this would be, say, someone opened in the hijack, the cutoff cold calls, and now it comes to us on the button. This would be our squeezing range. And as you notice here, again, we want to be going linear, which means good, better, and best, because the more players who call, the less likely we are to get our 3-bet through without seeing a flop. So because we're going to be seeing a flop a high percentage of the time, we just want to have hands that can out-hand them. You don't see hands like 7-6 suited or 6-5 suited or King 6 suited getting in there, right? The reason why we're going a little bit wider here, maybe down to ace jack off, down to pocket sevens, something like that, is because when someone opens and then someone cold calls, that cold call, there's just gonna be a lot of dead money out there. The cold call in general doesn't have very many strong hands. So we just want to be getting in there with hands that can outperform both the opener and the cold caller and just go with a linear range here, good, better, and best. All right, now let's talk about how do we play when we get 3-bet. First, let's talk about out of position, then we'll talk about in position. So out of position first. So let's say we open hijack and button 3-bets. This will be against a passive player. In general, a lot of recreational players are going to tilt more towards the passive side. We are not going to be doing a lot of 4-betting because when they 3-bet us, they're just 3-betting too tight of a range. And we do defend. You see, we're kind of just preferring like a lot of these like pairs or maybe these small direct suited connectors over even some of these like big Broadway cards. Like you see these offsuit Broadway cards are just all folded. The ace queen off, king queen off, ace jack off. These hands can just get us in trouble. I'm not randomizing here. I'm basing my kind of borderline calls off of what kind of skill edge do I have against this player? How predictably is this player going to play post flop? Are they going to barrel off when they miss, or are they just going to check back and let me realize? How deep are we? So again, this would kind of be like a rough starting point for a continue range when we get 3-bet and we are out of position versus a passive player. And as you can see, versus a more aggressive player, player, we are just continuing a little bit wider, and we're going to be 4-betting quite a bit more. One of the concepts I kind of want to drill home, which I think a lot of even live pros kind of misapply, when we are out of position and we get 3-bet, we want to be 4-betting a linear range. You can see this is kind of a pattern. Why do we want to be 4-betting a linear range? Well, in general, what is the player in position going to do? They 3-bet and now they get 4-bet and they're in position. They're going to be doing a lot of calling. So because they're going to be doing a lot of calling, we just want to 4-bet hands that can kind of outhand them. If they're going to be continuing with a hand like ace 10 suited or king 10 suited, then 4-betting off ace queen suited or king queen suited starts to look pretty good for us. And I think the mistake I see a lot of live players make is they start 4-betting from out of position hands like ace deuce suited or ace 6 suited or ace 4 suited or something like that. We don't want to be 4-betting a hand like ace 6 suited or ace 4 suited if in position is going to be continuing and calling with a hand like ace 10 suited or ace jack suited. We just want to be able to outhand them. So why not 4-bet the ace queen suited or the king queen suited that can dominate their continues rather than 4-betting a pure bluff if they're just going to be calling way too much. All right, now let's look at in position. So say we open button and small blind 3-bets. This is how I would continue. And as you see here, we continue much wider when we are going to be in position. This is the point we can start doing a lot more calling. When we're in position, we just don't have as much incentive to 4-bet because the out of position player isn't going to do nearly as much calling as the example before. Now, when they are out of position to us, they're going to be doing more put in the extra bet or folding. So we just don't really have a ton of incentive to 4-bet off a ton. So you see here, aces still gets pure 4-bet, especially when deep, because we can just cooler their kings. We can cooler their ace king suited. We can cooler their queens. Do not trap pocket aces. If you are 200 plus big blinds deep, now at 50 bigs or 60 bigs, whatever, that's a little bit different. Trapping aces when you're going to have an SPR of 1 going to the flop, that seems okay. But at 200 big blinds deep, you just always want to pile in more money as a 4-bet with pocket aces here. But in general, we just don't have a lot of incentive to continue with 4-bets. As you see here now, this is going to be one of the only examples where we continue with a polarized range. What is a polarized range? Well, quite simply, a polarized range is when we 4-bet off the very strongest hands at the top of our range and then the bottom of our range as well. And as you can see, it's not going to be like trashy hands here. It's going to be hands that compose the worst hands we would continue with. Maybe our worst suited aces, like ace 5 suited, ace 9 suited, our worst suited king, like a king 10 suited, and maybe one of our suited connectors, our direct suited connectors, like an 8-7 suited. So again, these are optional. The way I would decide if I'm going to 4-bet these kind of polarized bluff hands is, do they 3-bet enough and how are they continuing to a 4-bet? If they're going to be doing quite a lot of folding to a 4-bet, I may work in some of these bluffs. Now, if when they 3-bet, they're just never folding in a million years, I would cut these hands out, right? I would just never 4-bet the king 10 suited, ace 9 suited, 8-7 suited, and I would just go a little bit more linear with the top of my range. But in general, don't need to go overboard with this. Can generally just be doing a lot of calling in position when we get 3-bet. How does our range change when we get 3-bet by an aggressive player? Well, in general, we're just continuing pretty wide. As you see, the top of our range for 4-betting expands a little bit here. Now we're going to go down to queens, maybe all the ace king off, and the bottom of our range for 4-betting polar expands as well. Against an aggressive player, we want to be doing a little bit more 4-bet bluffing because they're just going to have a lot of hands that have to fold. So we want to use a lot of these kind of crappy ace X hands, right? Like ace deuce suited, ace 6 suited, ace 7 suited, kind of these hands that we don't mind if they jam. Well, okay, we were just bluffing. We can get out of the way. We can fold. We're not really folding out a bunch of equity here. Against the aggressive players, I would definitely work in some of these more polar 4-bet bluffs when we are in position. Again, when we are out of position, we generally want to 4-bet linear, good, better, and best. And when we're in position, that's when we can work in some of these more polarized 4-bet bluffs because the out of position player probably isn't going to be continuing as a call nearly as much as if they were in position. All right, let's talk about cold 4-betting. So say a player opens in the hijack and a player 3-bets in the cutoff, and now we are on the button. In general, in this specific scenario, I am continuing as either a cold 4-bet, meaning putting in the extra bet, or a fold. I am not a big fan of cold calling 3-bets when one player opens and then the next player 3-bets and we have yet to act. The reason why is because if we just cold call the 3-bet, lots of bad things can happen, whereas the original opener can now 4-bet and we are kind of shut out of the pot. And also our hand just kind of looks obvious. When people cold call 3-bets, they generally have hands that are like pocket jacks, pocket 10s, pocket 9s, maybe some ace king offsuit and some suited broadways, and they just don't have the top of that range. So you become pretty easy to play against when you start cold calling 3-bets. In general, it's just something I like to cut out of my game. Now, this is different than say we open and a player 3-bets us and back to us. In that case, it's okay to call. This is when an extra player gets added to the mix. So these ranges are going to be based upon the player who 3-bets. Say the player who 3-bets is very, very tight. Well, we want to be cold 4-betting very, very tight. Say the player who 3-bets is pretty aggressive and pretty wide. Well, we can be cold 4-betting a little bit wider here. So this is what a wide cold 4-bet range would look like. And as you can see, it's still pretty tight because when we come in for a cold 4-bet, it should just be kind of our very best hands. Now, it doesn't make sense to work in bluffs here like an ace-4 suited or an ace-3 suited if we're going to be folding ace-10 suited, right? We just want to use kind of our very best hands here. So this would be a wide cold 4-bet range, and this would be a tight cold 4-bet range. Now, very briefly, I want to talk about continuing versus 4-bets either in position or out of position. So say a player opens, we 3-bet them, and now they 4-bet us. Versus a passive player, as you see here, we're just continuing very, very tight because what does a passive player have when they 4-bet us? Kings, ace, king, queens, aces, something like that maybe. How do I decide if I'm continuing with these jacks, queens, ace, king off? Just how passive is the player? Have you seen this guy ever 4-bet bluff? Or is this the guy who hasn't 4-bet bluff since 1976? If the latter is the case, we could just pretty much be folding everything except kings plus. And against a more aggressive opponent, when they 4-bet, we continue just a little bit wider. Again, we're not really comfortable 5-betting anything except aces, and you may be thinking, well, aren't I unbalanced if I only 5-bet aces? Yes. Who cares? They're unbalanced when they 4-bet you because they are under 4-betting. Do you think they are going to be folding too much or folding too little when they 4-bet? They're going to be folding way too little once they 4-bet and you put in the 5-bet because their range is way too strong. So unless you start seeing recreational players fold hands like ace, king, or kings or queens to a jam, which doesn't really happen, then just go on your merry way and continue 5-betting only pocket aces against recreational players. Is this different against pros? Yes, this is different when we are playing against pros. We can't just be so face up. So let's talk now about some pre-flop adjustments we can make when playing against pros. All right, if you remember from earlier, I said when a pro opens, we want to be doing quite a lot of calling, and that is one of our exceptions because we want to let fish in the pot. So say a pro opens from under the gun, a strong pro opens from under the gun, and we are also in early position, and the rest of the table is fish. Well, we want to be doing quite a bit of flatting here because our incentive is to let the fish in the pot. But we can't just never 3-bet when a pro opens because we can't just let them get away with murder, right? And we can't just only 3-bet our very strongest hands because, well, pros are aware, they know what's going on, and if we did that, they would pick up on it. So here is the strategy I like to play when a pro opens and most of the rest of the table is fish, and this would be early position versus early position. I'm going to be 3-betting a polarized range. So you guessed it, the very top of my range, which from early position may look like kings plus, ace, king suited plus, and then the very bottom of our continuing range, which again, since we are early position and we have to worry about the 6 or 7 other players at the table behind us, would be very tight. So the bottom of our continuing range may be like our worst suited ace, ace 5 suited, our worst suited king, king jack suited, our worst suited jack and queen. So something like this when a pro opens from early position and we are also early position. Now, as we move to later position, say a pro opens from the cutoff and we are on the button, same incentives, but everything shifts a little bit wider. Now, the top of our range may look like jacks plus, ace king plus, ace queen suited plus, and the bottom of our range may look like our worst suited aces, right? The ace deuce suited and the ace 6 suited, some of our worst suited 9x here, and then some just kind of direct suited connectors. Again, a lot of flatting because if there's 2 fish in the blinds, we generally want to let those fish in and play a pot against the players who are going to make the biggest mistakes post-flop. Now, let's say a reg opens cutoff and we are on the button and there's also a strong pro in the small blind or 2 pros in the blinds. In that case, I would recommend table change. Or if you can't table change, say that's the only game going on in your casino, I would not be playing a polarized range. I would just be playing kind of a 3-bet or fold strategy in that example. If there's no fish behind, we just want to play a linear 3-bet or fold strategy when a pro opens. But in general, there are going to be fish behind when a pro opens. If you're playing live poker, that's usually how live poker works. So in that case, I'd be playing this more polarized strategy. Let the fish in the pot behind. All right, finally, and this may be most important, I'm gonna give you 7 pre-flop red flags to pay attention to when you are playing live poker. Red flag number 1, when a recreational player 5-bets. So say we open button, they 3-bet, we got kings, we're gonna put in the 4-bet for value, and now they 5-bet jam. 5 bets from recreational players are usually aces, but sometimes also, to be fair, it could also be aces. Hear those ambulance sirens coming in the distance, feel those goosebumps rising on the back of your your neck, you should be folding quite a lot. That is one of the scenarios where I may fold pocket kings in live poker when a recreational player 5 bets. Red flag number 2, and this is just as scary, when a recreational player 4 bets to greater than 1/3 of their stack size. Say a recreational player opens in the cutoff, we 3 bet the pocket kings, and now they 4 bet. They put in 350 starting 800 effective here. This is a red flag. Why is this a red flag? Well, if they had a hand like ace king, they may just jam. If they had a hand like queens, they would do a lot of calling, or sometimes they may just jam. When they 4 bet to this size, like 40% of their stack, what did they have? Well, usually they have aces, but once in a blue moon, and I'm going to be fair here, once in a blue moon, they also have aces. So this would be another scenario. Hear those ambulance sirens getting closer and closer. When they 4 bet to this percentage of their stack and essentially commit themselves pre-flop, they just have aces. All right, red flag number 3, when a recreational player cold 4 bets. So let's look at this here. A recreational player opens in the cutoff, we 3 bet on the button, and now a rec wakes up in the small blind and cold 4 bets. Why is this such a red flag? When they have a hand like jacks, or sometimes even queens, or 10s, or 9s, or ace king, a lot of the times what they'll do when it gets open and 3 bet in front of them is they'll just cold call. They'll just come in for a call. So when they 4 bet, what does that mean? Well, they just have aces and kings, maybe sometimes ace king suited or queens. So just be very, very, very cautious when a recreational player cold 4 bets, because the range is going to be very, very strong. All right, red flag number 4, when the big blind or player closing the action pre-flop 3 bets against an early position open. So say we open pocket kings from under the gun here, and now a recreational player in the big blind wakes up and 3 bets from the big blind. This is going to be very, very strong hands. It's going to be massively under bluffed. Why? Because players can just call from the big blind, right? So when they 3 bet here, it's not often going to be hands like 9s or 10s or king queen suited or something like that, because those hands are really tempting just to call when you are closing the action and you are out of position. So this isn't a situation where I would fold kings. This isn't as big as red flag as when a rec cold 4 bets or when they put in 40% of their stack pre-flop, but this is still a little bit alarming, and I would be continuing very, very tight. I would proceed very cautiously when a recreational player 3 bets from the big blind facing an early position open. Red flag number 5, when you face a large or abnormal open size for the game. Usually this is just going to be a very, very strong range. So say a rec opens from 40 under the gun when they're normally opening to 20 or 25. In this case, we can use this to our advantage. If we have a hand like kings or aces here, we don't want to 3 bet to a typical 3 or 4x sizing here. No, go big, because when they open to $40 from under the gun, they just have a hand that's not folding to a 3 bet. So this is an example where I may just go like 5 or 6x, a ridiculous 3 bet size when we do have a premium here, because they've told us, hey, I have a strong hand, I'm not folding. All right, red flag number 6, when a recreational player who has an open limping range opens from up front. If they have an open limping range, that means when they open raise, well, their range is just going to be stronger. So again here, say this player just limps a lot of times with pocket pairs or suited broadways or suited ace-x. When they open from under the gun, that means you're just gonna have like strong pairs, ace-king, ace-queen, hands like that. So if we wake up with a hand like kings or aces, again, we want to be going really, really big here, because they are not going to be open folding when they have this strong of a range. And finally, red flag number 7, when a recreational player limp raises pre-flop. So say they limp under the gun, we ISO here with kings, and now they put in the limp raise. And this is a situation, again, I may not be folding kings right here, but I would already be feeling pretty squeamish. I would be feeling very precarious. I would not be feeling gregarious. Okay, that's enough. I would just be continuing pretty tight here, and I would proceed very, very cautiously when they limp raise from early position. All right, guys, hopefully you enjoyed this video and this helps tighten up your pre-flop game. So now you can build that skyscraper and you don't fall on a pile full of beans. Thank you guys and have a gentle day.